educator, scientist, environmentalist, and co-founder of the David Suzuki Foundation, and my father, David Suzuki.
So pleased to be here in the province that gave us Tommy Douglas. Thank you. I, like Severn, would like to acknowledge the original people who lived here on this part of the pale blue dot and cared for it over thousands of years. I thank the David Suzuki Foundation for inviting me on this. Wow. They had to do it, it was my idea. But I do want to thank the superb Blue Dot team that is making this tour happen. And I want to thank the many musicians, the artists, the writers and thinkers, as well as the partners, sponsors, and many volunteers who care enough to donate their talent, their time, and their money to join us on this tour. And thank you. Thank you for coming on this beautiful evening and taking time out to join this marvelous evening here tonight. Tonight, I do not speak on behalf of any organization or group. I want to speak to you as a grandfather and as an elder. You see, elders have a very special place in society. We're no longer subject to the pressures or the temptations of power or celebrity or money. Well, I know there are a few elders that still run after that. They need help. Most of us are beyond that. And we don't have to worry about losing a job or a raise or a promotion. We don't have to worry about offending someone because we speak the truth from our hearts. That's their problem, not ours. And elders have something no other group in society has. We've lived an entire lifetime. We've made mistakes, suffered failures, celebrated successes. We've learned a lot. It's our job, I believe, it's our responsibility now to pass those hard-won lessons on to our children and our grandchildren. And that's what I'm trying to do on the Blue Dot Tour. The tour is named for that magnificent image of Earth as seen from space. Astronauts, on seeing our fragile blue planet from a distance, often undergo a profound shift that is called the overview effect. Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell said, "You develop an instant global consciousness, a people orientation, an intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and a compulsion to do something about it." The Blue Dot Tour is about many people coming together and doing something about it. Now, as humans, we pass our knowledge, our ideas on through our stories. We define ourselves through the stories we share. And increasingly, science informs those stories. Today, science tells us we are at a unique and utterly critical moment in all of human existence. Very suddenly, in evolutionary time, we have become a new kind of force on the planet. We've occupied every continent, and we are now the most numerous mammalian species in the world. There are more of us than any species of rat or mouse or rabbit. We are the dominant mammalian species on Earth. Modern technology allows us to explore every part of the planet in search of opportunity. And that fuels a global economy which feeds our apparently endless appetite for more stuff. And when you add that all together, our numbers, our technology, our consumption, and our global economy, we have become such a huge we have developed such a huge ecological footprint that we are now altering the physical, chemical, and biological properties of the planet on a geological scale. That's why scientists call this the Anthropocene epoch, a period when human activity is affecting the Earth the major factor affecting the properties of the planet. But in the process, with this huge power we have, we are now undermining the very things that keep us alive. So how did we arrive at this moment in time? For most of human existence, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers. We had to follow the animals and plants through the seasons and carry everything we owned on our backs. We understood very well that we were part of and utterly dependent on nature for our survival and our well-being. 10,000 years ago, the agricultural revolution signaled a profound change in human existence. We became farmers, and with a dependable source of food, we could now stay in one place. We could build permanent structures and develop villages. We farmers know very well that we are utterly dependent on weather and climate, on pollination, on moisture in the soil, and nitrogen fixation. They know very well, farmers know, that nature determines our well-being. 200 years ago, the Industrial Revolution amplified our muscle power and fueled by cheap and powerful fossil fuels that took us to every nook and cranny in the planet in search for new resources. My grandparents were part of an ongoing migration to new lands that began hundreds of years ago, arriving here from Japan in search of opportunity at the very beginning of the 20th century. When my grandparents left home, there were no telephones for trans-Pacific phone calls. There were no planes, there were no computers or Skype. They knew they were never going back. The Canada my grandparents moved to in the early 1900s was built on policies of colonization, extermination, or assimilation of the original peoples that continues to this day. My grandparents and my Canadian-born parents, like many others of color, and all Indigenous people couldn't vote. They couldn't buy property in many places, and they couldn't enter most professions. My father was born in Vancouver in 1909, my mother in 1911. Like the first generation of colonizers in new lands all over the world, my parents grew up without grandparents or elders in this new land. Unlike the Indigenous people whose oral history goes back thousands of years, my parents had no roots in this new world. So they acquired the attitude of their parents who had come to Canada in search of opportunity. My parents were taught you've got to work hard to earn money to buy land. And whatever was on it, whether they were trees or fish or minerals or topsoil, use that land in order to make money. That's the cultural background into which I was born and which many other Canadians were born into. But it leads to a very different relationship with the land than those who have occupied the same place for millennia. And I began to change in my perspective of that relationship with the land after I began to meet and work with Indigenous people in Canada, and then in South America, Africa, Australia, and even Japan. They have taught me my most profound lessons about connectedness to and reverence for place that we heard Candace Savage tell us so powerfully about this evening. They taught me the earth is our mother, providing all that we need to live and live well. Air, water, soil, food, energy from the sun, and biodiversity. Surely Canada, a wealthy nation, should protect our most precious inheritance, the air, the water, the soil, and rich diversity that are the key to our health, prosperity, and happiness. Now, although Canadians pride ourselves in our democratic institutions, we should remember that our ideas and beliefs are constantly evolving. After Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, the government deprived Japanese Canadians, like my family, of all rights of citizenship under the War Measures Act. We were Canadian born and raised, yet we lost everything. We were incarcerated in the British Columbia interior for the duration of the war. And then at war's end, we were told we had two choices. We had to get out of British Columbia by going to Japan, which was a foreign country to us, or east of the Rockies. But in the 1980s, Canada formally apologized for the treatment of Japanese Canadians during World War II and paid reparations to all of the survivors. We should remember that less than 100 years ago, half the population of Canada were considered not fully mature until women got the right to vote in 1918. Our African Canadians and Asian Canadians, including those who were born and raised here, like my parents, didn't get the vote until 1960. Indigenous people of Canada didn't get that vote until 1969. Sorry, let me back. My parents got it in 48. Indigenous people in 60. Homosexuality was illegal in this country, often with prison sentences for being gay, until 1969. Now, Canadian same-sex couples can marry. Our ideas of basic rights have evolved over time. Another example, my parents lived in constant fear of an accident or getting sick that could cripple them financially. My wife Tara recently suffered a severe heart failure and was rushed to emergency and stayed in intensive care for 5 days. She was never once asked, how are you going to pay for this? Because this is Canada. And I am so proud and grateful. And people, ordinary Canadians, overcame immense opposition and brought in the medical system that we're so proud of today. None of those rights was gained without struggle. It's only when enough people get together to demand change that we make advances in rights that benefit all of society. I know in a world of 7 billion people, each of us is a drop in the bucket. But with enough drops, we'll fill any bucket there is. In 1962, I was just beginning my career in science, and I was keen to make my name as a geneticist, when Rachel Carson changed the course of my life by publishing Silent Spring, a book that documented the unintended consequences of pesticides. Carson showed that farmers' fields are not like the controlled conditions of the lab in a flask or a growth chamber. Used in the real world, pesticides spread through whole ecosystems. Until Rachel Carson, no government in the world had a Department of the Environment. And like millions of people around the world, I was galvanized by her book and was swept up in issues in British Columbia about clear-cut logging, pulp mill pollution, oil tankers along our coasts, mega dams, drilling for oil in sensitive areas. I thought the problem was humans were taking too much stuff out of the environment and putting too much toxic material and waste back into it. So in my mind, the solution was to pass laws and regulate how much and what we could remove from the environment and how much and what we could be allowed to put back into it and enforce the regulations. But I soon realized, how can we possibly do that when we don't know enough to know what the impact is and therefore to regulate it? When DDT began to be widely used, we didn't know that when DDT is sprayed onto open fields, that the chemical could move up the food chain, killing fish, sterilizing birds, and causing cancer in humans. We only discovered biomagnification years later. When atomic bombs were dropped over Japan, we didn't know there was a thing called radioactive fallout. We discovered that when bombs were blown up in Bikini years later. When CFCs were widely used, we didn't know they would affect the ozone layer. So how could we manage these powerful technologies when we were so ignorant about how the world works? I went through a shift in my environmental awareness in the early 1980s when I made a film for the Nature of Things about the battle over logging in the islands called the Haida Gwaii, the archipelago off the northwest corner of British Columbia. For years, environmentalists, Haida loggers, and politicians had battled over the future of the great forests of those islands. And the indigenous Haida people had a high level of unemployment and were desperate for the kinds of jobs that forestry offered. And yet they were united in opposition to those forest companies and their practices. So I interviewed one of the Haida leaders, an artist, who had led the fight against logging for years. And I said to him, "You're an artist. What difference does it make? Your people need jobs. What difference does it make to you if they cut the trees down?" And his answer puzzled me. He said, "Well, sure, you cut the trees down, we'll still be here. But then we'll be like everyone else." And I had to think about, what the heck does that mean? And it was only much later that I realized that he had opened a window on a radically different way of seeing the world. That to be Haida meant to be connected to the land. They don't end at their skin or their fingertips. They had to be connected to the land, that the air, the water, the fish, the birds, and the trees, all of that is what make the Haida who they are. That the land is their history, their culture, the very reason why Haida are on this earth is told to them by their connection to the land. Sever that connection by cutting the trees down, and they become rootless like everyone else. And that's when I began my journey of learning around the world with indigenous people. And I began to realize that we environmentalists had framed the problem the wrong way. There's no environment out there, and we're here, and we have to regulate our interaction with it. We are as much a part of the environment as all of the other things that we see around us. We are as connected and a part of the trees and the birds and the fish and the sky and the rocks and the rivers. Whatever we do to them, we do directly to ourselves. The environmental crisis is a human crisis. We are at the center of it as both the cause and the victims of our actions. Indigenous people have taught me what they have known for millennia, that everything on this small blue planet is interconnected and interdependent, held together by Mother Earth. The very first thing every one of us needed when we left our mother's body was a breath of air. That first breath was to inflate our lungs and then announce that we had arrived on Earth. And from that moment on to the last breath we take before we die, we need air every minute of our lives. And we don't even think about it. It's so easy. Each breath sucks 2 to 3 liters of air deep into our bodies, into those mushy little organs we call our lungs. And as soon as the air hits our lungs, hemoglobin molecules and red blood cells latch onto the oxygen. And with each beat of the heart, that oxygen is pumped to every cell in our bodies and becomes a part of us. When we breathe out, we don't breathe all the air out. If we did that, our lungs would collapse. About half of the air stays in our lungs even when we exhale. So the point is, there is no line that separates us from the air. It's in us, it's embedded, and stuck to us, and circulating through our bodies and becomes a part of us. We are air. And the air that we do exhale very quickly spreads through convection currents through this room, and it's going straight up your nose. When I say this to young children, I see them going, oh, yeah, as if they got a little bubble of air that belongs to them. matrix of air that connects us, not only us in this room or to all the people in Saskatoon, but everyone on the planet. We're connected to the birds and the trees and the fish and the worms and the snakes. We're all a part of that matrix of air. And every breath we take will have atoms and molecules that were once embedded in the bodies of Joan of Arc and Jesus Christ and dinosaurs 65 million years ago. And every breath we take will suffuse life forms as far as we can see into the future. So air, that important substance that envelops Mother Earth, should be considered sacred. If we don't breathe air for 3 or 4 minutes, we're dead. If we have to breathe contaminated air, we're sick. We humans boast of our superior intelligence, yet we use air as a toxic dump. We are air. Whatever we do to the air, we do directly to ourselves, and every parent of an asthmatic child knows that very, very well. We are the air. Every one of us is at least 60% water by weight. We're basically a big blob of water with enough thickener added we don't dribble away on the floor. But of course the water leaks. Our bodies leak. It comes out of our skin and our eyes and our mouth and our crotch, and we lose water all the time. When I take a drink of water, do you think this is Saskatoon water? Of course it's temporarily Saskatoon water. First thing we learn in science in grade school is the water cycle, right? Water covers 70% of the world, evaporates, forms clouds, rains on the land, runs into rivers and lakes, evaporates. Water cartwheels around the earth. And every drink we take will have molecules that were once in the part of every ocean on the planet, evaporated off the canopies of the great rainforests of the world, evaporated off the prairies and wetlands. Water is what connects us as well, and if we don't have water for 3 or 4 days, we die. If we have to drink polluted water, we sicken. And yet we use water as a toxic dump, as if the solution to pollution is dilution, forgetting that we are water, and whatever we put into the water, we put into ourselves. Every bit of the food that we eat was once alive. Most of it were plants grown in soil. We take the carcasses of plants and animals, tear them apart, and liberate atoms and molecules in our mouth and our stomach, and then we incorporate those atoms and molecules to create the bodies that are us. We are created out of the earth by the food that we eat. And yet, we put toxic waste into the earth and spray, even inject poisonous compounds onto or into the plants and animals that we will eat. And all of the energy in our bodies that we need to move and grow and reproduce, all of that is the fire of the sun, captured by photosynthesis in plants, converted into chemical energy that we then get by eating the plants or eating the animals that eat the plants. And we then capture that chemical energy, store it in our bodies, and when we need it, we burn those molecules and release the sunlight back out into our bodies. We are sunlight. And yet we are reducing our most fundamental source of energy, that energy, through deforestation and ocean pollution. Earth, air, fire, and water. Indigenous people often refer to these vital elements as sacred, beyond economic valuation. And amazingly, those elements, earth, air, fire, and water, are cleansed, replenished, or created by the web of living things that scientists call biodiversity. Plants exchange carbon dioxide for oxygen, making air breathable for animals like us. Plant roots and soil microorganisms filter water as it percolates through the soil. Life creates soil. Before there was any life on earth, there was no soil in which we grow our food. And And planets then capture all of the sunlight that we need to power all life on Earth. The four sacred elements, earth, air, fire, and water, are a sacred gift from what indigenous people call our relatives, our biological kin. A perspective, again, that is confirmed by modern genetics. Every one of us carries thousands of genes identical to the genes found in salmon, in eagles, in cedar and bears, because we all share a common evolutionary history. All life is related to us, and surely we treat our relatives with greater respect and care than if we simply regard them as resources. During the 1960s, the 70s, and 80s, environmentalists fought and succeeded in stopping dams, oil tankers along the BC coast, drilling for oil in sensitive areas. But 35 years later, we're fighting exactly the same issues again, because we failed to change the way that we see our place in this world. Our stories are what reflect our values and our beliefs about our world. So some will see the forest as a sacred grove, but others see it as pulp and lumber. Some see a river as the circulatory system of the land, others as irrigation and power. Is another species our biological kin, or simply a resource? Is your house a home, or just real estate? Is Earth our mother, or a mother lode? The way we see the world shapes the way we treat it, and we need a more balanced perspective in the stories we tell. That's why we are on the Blue Dot Tour, to enshrine the right to a healthy environment, clean air, fresh water, nourishing food in our Constitution, recognizing our right to these fundamental elements. We can't go on fighting and negotiating because it locks us in as adversaries. We have to come together and agree on what our most fundamental needs are, so that then we can all work together to ensure the protection of those things, and then to find a way to create an economy that does not disrupt these priceless needs. The true measure of a country is not in the number of extremely wealthy individuals, but rather the state, the condition of our poorest, our weakest, most vulnerable among us. Our campaign for environmental rights is also one for human rights and social justice. Many of our environmental problems are created by societal inequities, hunger and poverty, chronic unemployment, absence of social services, inadequate public transit, and often conflicting priorities of corporations in the public interest, as people at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale are disproportionately affected by environmental hazards and toxic pollution. The right to live in a healthy environment is constitutionally recognized by more than half of the world's nations, more than 110 countries, but not Canada, despite the efforts of many people over the past years. Countries with this right generally rank higher in protecting the environment and addressing issues like air pollution and climate change. And it's not a right-left political issue. Conservative President Jacques Chirac championed constitutional recognition of the right to a healthy environment in France. More than 100,000 French citizens took part in public hearings on the issue, and France's Charter for the Environment was enacted with broad support from all political parties. And it's not about hindering the economy. Countries with environmental rights often see improved economic performance through increased innovation and competitiveness, development of sustainable industries and clean technologies, as well as lower healthcare costs. If we had such rights in Canada, it would mean the rights of people to breathe clean air and enjoy good health in Ontario's Chemical Valley in Sarnia would come before the rights of local refineries and chemical plants to spew pollutants into their surroundings. And it would mean all Canadians would have the right to drink water from their taps without worrying that it might make them sick or even kill them. It would benefit the most vulnerable in society, who often have to live near the contaminating industries. We cannot have a strong economy without a healthy, vibrant people. And we can't have healthy people without a healthy environment. How can we bring about this change? Look around you. When the lights go on, have a look. We in this room tonight are the people who can make it happen, because if not us, then who? From my perspective as an elder, I know the most important thing any one of us can do is to make the commitment to work together to achieve the vision. Great movements were inspired by individuals like Mahatma Gandhi, Rachel Carson, and Nelson Mandela. And ordinary people brought down the Berlin Wall. Change can happen. And when we stand together, nothing is impossible. Children and grandchildren and their grandchildren to live in a Canada and a world where clean air, fresh water, fertile soil, and abundant biodiversity are recognized as our most precious needs and protected by the Constitution. We want future generations to inherit a Canada that lives up to its values, with the rights of all citizens protected. In a democracy, we elect people to serve us, and it's up to us to inform them what we want them to do. So let us celebrate Canada, and let us celebrate what it is and what it can be. Let us talk about what matters most to our health and well-being, and let us accept our responsibility to protect those things. Tonight, I'm asking you to join me. Join the David Suzuki Foundation and the many other groups that are working with us to create a groundswell, a movement to sweep the country, to enshrine our highest values in the Charter of Rights and Freedom, first in municipalities, then at the provincial, and finally federal levels. Let us think about the future, the things that matter most to us, and then we can work together to achieve them, because together we can. And I believe we will make it happen. Thank you very much.